Tonight, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted to hold in contempt former presidential advisor Karl Rove and Chief of Staff Josh Bolten after they refused to testify about the politically motivated firings of U.S. attorneys. Now, this could be connected. This latest development comes as we wrap up our series, Bush League Justice, our investigation into how this administration has politicized the Justice Department. One of the most stunning allegations about pure politics trumping objective justice occurred in the state of Alabama, where the former Democratic governor remains behind bars tonight, and the prosecution of the case may be traced back to one of the most powerful members of the president's inner council, Karl Rove. In 2003, Democratic Governor Don Siegelman was attempting a political comeback after narrowly losing re-election to Republican Bob Riley. That's when Siegelman's life was turned upside down. He was investigated twice by the feds, eventually convicted, and this year, sentenced to 7 years on corruption charges. But evidence is mounting that he may have been singled out for prosecution by prominent Alabama Republicans, and ultimately, presidential advisor Karl Rove. The chief witness against him testified the corruption involved Siegelman as well as two prominent Alabama Republicans, one currently a federal judge, the other a U.S. senator. But neither of them were investigated or prosecuted. Just Siegelman, the Democrat. And then a Republican lawyer who was working on the campaign against Siegelman came forward, saying under oath that key Republicans on Governor Riley's team discussed talking to Karl Rove about the case, quoting one of them who said, not to worry, that he'd already gotten it worked out with Karl, and Karl had spoken to the Department of Justice. If Rove was involved in bringing Siegelman down, then this is an outrageous example of politics trumping objective justice. Joining me now, Representative Artur Davis from Alabama. He's a former federal prosecutor who's been investigating this case, and Scott Horton, a Columbia law professor who has covered the case extensively for Harper's Magazine. Thanks to both of you for coming on the program. Appreciate it. All right.
Thank you, Dan.
Representative Davis, what is the latest here? I mean, you've been trying to get some information. You've been trying to get documents, et cetera. So far, you haven't had any luck, have you?
Well, there's been a stone wall around this case from the White House. There's been a stone wall around most of these allegations of Department of Justice impropriety. There are a lot of facts in this case, but let me just try to cut through the essence of it. An extremely weak case that normally would not have been brought against anyone, much less a former governor, was brought against Don Siegelman. We know that the former lawyer for Don Siegelman, a very respected individual named Doug Jones, who himself used to be U.S. attorney, we know that Doug Jones says that he was told in 2004 that there really wasn't much of a case against Don Siegelman. The prosecutors were walking away from it. Then he says at the end of that year that he learned that the Department of Justice had called the U.S. Attorney's Office in Montgomery and said, go back and do a top-down review of this case. And at that point, the thing turned into a fishing expedition.
And let me just bring you in, Scott. Again, we talk about the Department of Justice, but there is this allegation out there of Karl Rove. I mean, what is the evidence that Karl Rove had contact with these prosecutors to get them to sort of get Siegelman?
Well, we don't have all the links in place, but we do know that certainly beginning from 2002, Karl Rove, out of the White House, was deeply involved in the election campaign of Rob Riley, was structuring it, raising money for it, putting together a strategy for it. A part of that strategy involved the criminal justice system, nailing charges, landing charges on Siegelman of some sort. And we know that it involved, at some point, consultations with the Justice Department and also two U.S. attorneys in Alabama, both of whom at one point brought charges against Siegelman.
Well, and you made the point that you think that today's news about holding Rove and Bolten in contempt may be related to this case?
I think there's no doubt about it. I think if we got into all the communications records from the White House, email traffic and everything else, we would find a pattern of communications between Rove and individuals who were deeply involved in this case. That would certainly include political operatives in Alabama, might include people in the Justice Department or in these U.S. attorneys' offices.
All right, Representative Davis, I'm going to ask you why they wanted to go after Siegelman so badly, but in the process of doing that, I want to lay out a timeline that I think may help sort of put everything into perspective here. So in November 2002, Siegelman narrowly loses his re-election bid for governor. In May of 2004, he's indicted on the corruption charges. In October of 2004, the charges are dropped. 2005, he's launched another run for governor. Then, in October of 2005, he's indicted on 32 counts, including bribery and conspiracy. June of 2006, he loses the Democratic primary. And June 2007, he's sentenced to prison. I mean, was he such a threat in Alabama that they had to use the arm of justice to get him out?
Dan, this is what I think happened in this case. There are some people, and Karl Rove is a classic example of it, if they decide that their opposition is corrupt, if they decide the people they're trying to beat are corrupt in some way, their attitude is we can throw anything at them that we want to, and why not use the U.S. Attorney's Office as another arm of politics? That's what's wrong about this case and what's wrong about so many others. And the U.S. Attorney's Office is not an opposition research tool. You don't use it to bring down people politically. And in this case, ultimately, Dan Siegelman was convicted based on the word of two people, one of whom changed his story 3 different times. Normally, the government wouldn't rely on a witness like that. The other one, as you mentioned in your opener, told similar allegations or made similar allegations against 2 high-ranking Republicans, allegations that were never followed up. So one of 2 things happens. Either he was lying about the Republicans, in which case he shouldn't have been used as a witness, or alternatively, they weren't interested in what he had to say about the Republicans, and it's a classic evidence of selective prosecution.
Professor, let's talk
about a case built on 2 weak witnesses.
Let's talk about the connection between Karl Rove and these prosecutors, all right? You've got this Republican lawyer who's coming forward, Dana Jill Simpson.
That's right.
And she's offering sworn statements and say, look, I was working for the Republican governor at the time, Governor Riley, and I heard conversations which she then came forward under oath and said effectively that Karl Rove was taking care of things. One of them is that Bill Canary, who's a very important Alabama Republican operative, also the husband of the U.S. attorney down there, said, Rob, don't worry, my girls are getting him. Laura's my wife. She works for the Middle District. Then Alice Martin works for the Northern District. What does all that mean?
Well, I think, you know, William Canary certainly is a linchpin figure here. And Canary, you mentioned the Harold C. race for the Supreme Court in Alabama at the opening of the segment. Well, his close collaborator in that effort was Bill Canary. I mean, they're close friends, Rove and Canary are. So that is clearly a key connection into this case. And
Canary's wife is the one who brought the case.
Oh, that's right. And I'm sure that that Bill Canary and his wife Laura never talked to one another.
So the allegation again is that Rove is calling Canary, and Canary and his wife are in cahoots effectively.
That's right. And Alice Martin has been taking campaign advice regularly from Bill Canary.
Representative Davis, look, you know, you've got 44 state attorneys general from around the country, Republicans and Democrats, who wrote the following letter. We, the undersigned, former state attorneys general, both Democrats and Republicans, urge the U.S. Congress to investigate the circumstances surrounding the investigation, prosecution, sentencing, and detention of Dan Siegelman. There is reason to believe that the case may have had sufficient irregularities as to call into question the basic fairness that is the linchpin of our system of justice. Did this letter not have any impact?
Well, it has had an impact. Dan, I was a federal prosecutor, and in fact, I worked in the Middle District of Alabama for several years. I can't imagine bringing a case that rested on 2 non-credible witnesses, both of whom had been caught in lies.
Right, but why,
if you were talking about a regular person driving down the street,
but why is this letter's pretty powerful? I guess is my question.
I think it has had an impact.
You do?
It's a major reason why the House Judiciary Committee has shown an interest in this case. You make the point. These are 44 former state attorney generals, Democrats and Republicans, who prosecuted cases. They look at the Siegelman case. I got to say one other thing, and that is that Siegelman's former attorney has also made the point that he felt like he was told this is all going away. Absolutely.
And here's what Siegelman said in 2004 after his lawyer apparently told him that.
I can't tell you what a great feeling it is to have this chapter closed and have this ordeal behind us.
Real quickly, Professor, then they I mean, the charges are dropped, and they wanted him so badly that they bring new charges. They bring him up just in time for the election season again. I mean, it's closely geared to the election. I've also been told by people in the Justice Department they understood the case was over, and pressure came from on high to bring it again. All right, we are going to stay on this story. We are not going to just let this go away. Congressman Artur Davis, Scott Horton, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Now, while this was the last episode of this series, our Bush League investigations are far from over. A new Attorney General has taken over. We are going to be watching very closely. The days of Justice Department malfeasance remaining under the mainstream media radar are over. You're on notice.